The exclusive restaurant Maison Azur glowed with ambient lighting as Keanu Reeves quietly took a seat at a corner table, dressed in his typical casual attire, a simple black t-shirt and worn jeans. With his hair slightly disheveled and beard untrimmed, he looked nothing like a Hollywood star worth hundreds of millions. The executive chef, known for his arrogance and celebrity treatment, approached the table with a condescending smile. "Perhaps Sir would be more comfortable at the diner down the street," he sneered loudly. But what happened next not only silenced the entire restaurant, but revealed a truth that would change everything forever. Before we continue with this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to our channel because tomorrow at 12:30 p.m. we have another special story that will touch your heart. Maison Azur wasn't just any restaurant in Beverly Hills. It was the crown jewel of the culinary scene, where reservations were booked 6 months in advance, and where Hollywood's elite came not just to eat, but to be seen. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ornate ceiling, casting a warm glow over the meticulously arranged tables draped in pristine white linen. The restaurant's blue accents, from the custom-made plates to the hand-blown glass centerpieces, justified its name and elevated the dining experience to an art form. The restaurant had been featured in countless magazines, television shows, and celebrity Instagram posts. Its reputation was built not just on its exquisite food, but on its exclusivity. The unspoken understanding was that Maison Azur wasn't for everyone. It was for those who belonged to a certain echelon of society, those who understood the intricate dance of high-end dining, those who could afford to spend on a single meal what many people earned in a week. Chef Marcel moved through his restaurant like a general inspecting his troops. At 45, he had built a culinary empire with 3 Michelin stars and a waiting list that made even celebrities humble themselves. His slicked-back hair and perpetual frown had become as much his trademark as his famous truffle soufflé. The chef's temperament was legendary. Stories of him ejecting diners for using the wrong fork or taking photos of their food circulated throughout Hollywood like cautionary tales. Marcel had not always been this way. 20 years ago, he had been a passionate young chef with dreams of creating food that would bring joy to people. He had trained in the kitchens of Europe, learning from masters who valued both technique and heart. But somewhere along his journey to the top, something had changed. The pressure of maintaining his stars, the constant scrutiny, the demands of catering to the elite. It had hardened him, turned his passion into precision and his joy into judgment. His staff feared him more than they respected him. They moved with nervous efficiency, aware that a single mistake could result in a public dressing down or even dismissal. The turnover rate at Maison Azur was high, but there was never a shortage of ambitious young culinary professionals willing to endure Marcel's tyranny for the prestige of having his restaurant on their resume. But Marcel's behavior was tolerated because his food was truly exceptional. Critics called him a genius. Celebrities paid obscene amounts to have him cater private events, and Marcel, for his part, had come to believe that his culinary skills gave him the right to treat people however he wished. This Tuesday evening began like any other. The dining room buzzed with the quiet conversations of the wealthy and famous. A prominent director discussed his next project with a studio executive. A group of tech billionaires compared notes on their latest investments. A famous actress celebrated her birthday surrounded by sycophants and smartphones. Emma Rodriguez had been working as a hostess at Maison Azur for just 3 months. At 24, she was studying hospitality management at UCLA while working evenings at the restaurant. Unlike many of her co-workers who had become jaded by the constant parade of celebrities, Emma still found herself occasionally starstruck. She maintained a professional demeanor, of course, but there was still a thrill in seating someone whose films she had grown up watching or whose music had defined her teenage years. Emma had learned quickly that working at Maison Azur meant adopting a certain attitude, cool, aloof, almost bored by the opulence surrounding her. Chef Marcel insisted on it. "We are not impressed by these people," he had told her during her training. "They are impressed by us." It was a philosophy that ran counter to Emma's naturally warm personality, but she needed this job and the connections it could provide for her future career. Jacques Benoit had been serving at Maison Azur for 5 years, an eternity in Marcel's volatile domain. At 35, he had mastered the art of invisibility, moving efficiently through the dining room, anticipating needs before they were expressed, and most importantly, avoiding Marcel's wrath. He had learned to read the chef's moods, to sense when to approach and when to maintain distance. It was a survival skill that had kept him employed while dozens of other servers had come and gone. Tonight, Jacques had been assigned to the VIP section, where the tech billionaires were halfway through their tasting menu. They were demanding but predictable: expensive wine, excessive compliments to the chef, and the occasional request to modify a dish that Jacques would never dare relay to Marcel. He had just finished explaining the components of the 6th course when he noticed a stir at the entrance, and then Keanu Reeves walked in. There was no grand entrance, no entourage, not even a reservation. He simply appeared at the hostess stand, unassuming and calm as always, asking if a table might be available. Emma recognized him immediately, despite his casual appearance. Unlike most celebrities who graced Maison Azur, Keanu wore no designer labels, no expensive watch, not even a hint of the wealth he possessed. Just worn jeans, a simple black t-shirt, and comfortable boots that had clearly seen many miles. Emma had always heard that Keanu Reeves was different from other Hollywood stars. Humble, kind, genuinely decent. But in the world of Maison Azur, appearance was everything, and she could already imagine Marcel's reaction to Keanu's casual attire. "Mr. Reeves," Emma said, her voice soft with surprise, "we don't have any reservations under your name, but let me see what I can do." Keanu smiled that gentle smile that had charmed millions on screen. "Thank you. I appreciate that. It's just me, so I don't need anything special." Emma quickly scanned the reservation system on her tablet. Marcel had strict rules about walk-ins. Essentially, they weren't allowed unless they were major celebrities or influential food critics. Keanu certainly qualified as the former, but his outfit wouldn't meet Marcel's exacting standards. She hesitated, torn between following protocol and turning away someone she genuinely admired. "Is there a problem?" Keanu asked, noticing her hesitation. "No, not at all," Emma assured him quickly. "It's just that we're quite busy tonight and—" She trailed off, unwilling to mention the unspoken dress code. "I understand," Keanu said, already beginning to turn away. "No worries, I can find somewhere else." The kindness and lack of entitlement in his voice made Emma's decision for her. "Actually, Mr. Reeves, we do have a table. If you'll just give me a moment to have it prepared." Emma quickly scanned the dining room. There was one small table available in the corner, not where they would typically seat someone of Keanu's stature, but it was either that or turn him away. She made a quick decision. "I have a table for you, Mr. Reeves, if you'll follow me." As Emma led Keanu through the restaurant, heads turned. Whispers followed in their wake. "Is that Keanu Reeves? What's he doing here? Is he filming something nearby?" But true to his reputation, Keanu seemed oblivious to the attention, thanking Emma warmly as she seated him at the small corner table. "Your server will be with you shortly," Emma said, placing a menu before him. She hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Reeves. I loved you in The Matrix." Keanu looked up, his expression genuinely appreciative. "Thank you. That's very kind of you to say." As Emma returned to her post, she noticed Marcel emerging from the kitchen, his sharp eyes scanning the dining room as they did every half hour. She tensed, knowing what was coming. Marcel, who had been discussing a wine pairing with a wealthy regular, noticed the commotion. His eyes narrowed as he observed Keanu settling into the corner table. The actor's casual attire was an affront to everything Marcel believed his restaurant stood for. Maison Azur was a temple of luxury and refinement, not a place for someone in a t-shirt and jeans, celebrity or not. The chef excused himself from his conversation and strode across the dining room, intercepting Emma before she could return to the hostess stand. "Who is that?" he demanded, though his tone suggested he already knew. "Keanu Reeves, chef," Emma replied, her voice carefully neutral. "He came in without a reservation, but we had the corner table available." Marcel's jaw tightened. "And you seated him?" "Looking like that." Emma swallowed hard. "He's Keanu Reeves, chef, I thought." "You thought wrong," Marcel cut her off. "This isn't a coffee shop. We have standards." He glanced over at Keanu, who was calmly studying the menu, unaware of the storm brewing across the room. "I'll handle this myself." Emma wanted to protest, but knew it would be futile. She nodded silently and stepped aside, watching nervously as Marcel approached Jacques, who had been assigned to Keanu's section. "I'll handle this one personally," Marcel said, his French accent thickening as it always did when he was annoyed. "We can't have just anyone thinking they can walk in off the street." Jacques, who had worked at Maison Azur for 5 years, knew better than to argue. He nodded and stepped aside, watching nervously as Marcel approached Keanu's table with a menu in hand. "Good evening," Marcel said, his tone icy as he placed a single menu before Keanu. "I am Chef Marcel Laurent. I must say, we don't often accommodate unexpected guests." His gaze swept over Keanu's casual clothing with barely disguised disdain. Keanu, unperturbed, looked up with genuine warmth. "Thanks for making space for me. I've heard your food is incredible." Marcel's expression remained frosty. "Our tasting menu is 14 courses. It takes approximately 3 hours to complete the experience." "Perhaps that's not what you were looking for this evening." The suggestion was clear. Marcel was giving Keanu an opportunity to leave before embarrassing himself. But Keanu, either missing or ignoring the implication, simply smiled again. "Actually, I'm not very hungry. Could I just order a single dish? Maybe something simple? Pasta, perhaps?" Marcel's eyebrows shot up. In his restaurant, diners did not order something simple. They didn't request pasta like they were at an Italian chain restaurant. They experienced his carefully crafted tasting menu, his artistic vision, his culinary genius. "Pasta," he repeated, allowing the word to hang in the air between them as if it were a profanity. "We don't serve simple pasta here, monsieur. This is a 3 Michelin star establishment." By now, nearby diners were watching the interaction. Marcel's voice had risen just enough to carry to the surrounding tables. The famous actress at the birthday celebration had stopped mid-selfie to observe. The tech billionaires had paused their conversation. Keanu seemed to notice the attention for the first time, and a slight discomfort crossed his face. Not for himself, but for the chef, who was clearly distressed. "I understand," Keanu said gently. "Then I'll trust your recommendation. What would you suggest for someone who'd prefer just one course this evening?" Marcel laughed, a sharp sound without humor. "One course? At Maison Azur?" He turned slightly, making sure his next words would carry to the neighboring tables. "Perhaps Sir would be more comfortable at the diner down the street. I believe they serve pasta." The last word dripped with condescension. A hush fell over the nearby tables. Emma, watching from the hostess stand, cringed. Jacques, hovering nearby, looked at the floor, embarrassed for all involved. But most eyes were on Keanu, waiting for his reaction. What happened next would be recounted in Hollywood circles for years to come. Keanu didn't get angry. He didn't demand special treatment. He didn't remind Marcel who he was. or threaten to damage the restaurant's reputation. Instead, he looked directly into the chef's eyes with that same calm intensity he brought to his most powerful film roles. "Food isn't just about complexity or price," Keanu said, his voice soft but clear. "Sometimes the most meaningful meals are the simplest ones, shared with people we care about." He paused, still holding Marcel's gaze. "My mother worked double shifts when I was growing up. When she could cook for me, it was often just pasta, but it was made with love, and that made it special." The restaurant had gone completely silent. Marcel stood frozen, his contemptuous smile fading. "I came here tonight because I heard you're a chef who puts passion into your food," Keanu continued. "That's something I respect deeply, but passion and kindness aren't mutually exclusive. In fact, they're at their most powerful when they exist together." Marcel swallowed hard, his arrogance visibly deflating under Keanu's gentle wisdom. For perhaps the first time in years, the chef found himself speechless in his own restaurant. Then, from a table near the back, a slow clap began. It was the elderly man who had been dining alone all evening, wearing an unassuming suit that gave no hint of his identity. As heads turned toward the sound, the man stood up. "Well said, Mr. Reeves," called out the elderly gentleman, his voice carrying a slight Italian accent. "Very well said indeed." Emma gasped audibly from the hostess stand. Jacques dropped the water pitcher he was holding, barely catching it before it hit the floor. Even Marcel's face, already pale, now turned completely white. The elderly man was Giorgio Valentini, the legendary restaurateur who had mentored Marcel 20 years ago, and who now owned a controlling interest in Maison Azur. His visits were rare and always unannounced, his purpose always to ensure that his establishments maintained not just culinary excellence, but the warmth of genuine hospitality. Giorgio Valentini's story was the stuff of culinary legend. Born in a small village outside of Florence, he had started as a dishwasher in his uncle's trattoria at the age of 12. Through determination, natural talent, and an unwavering belief that food should nourish both body and soul, he had risen to become one of the most respected figures in international gastronomy. His restaurant empire spanned 3 continents, but unlike many of his contemporaries, he had never lost touch with the simple joy of a well-prepared meal shared in good company. Marcel had been one of Giorgio's most promising protégés. The elder chef had seen in the young Marcel not just technical brilliance, but a genuine love for cooking. He had taken Marcel under his wing, taught him everything he knew, and eventually backed him financially when Marcel was ready to open his own restaurant. But over the years, as Marcel's star had risen, their relationship had become strained. Giorgio had watched with growing concern as Marcel's perfectionism hardened into rigidity, his confidence into arrogance. Tonight, Giorgio had come to Maison Azur unannounced, as was his custom, to see firsthand what had become of his former student's establishment. What he had observed over the course of his meal had troubled him deeply. The fear in the staff's eyes, the cold efficiency that had replaced warmth and hospitality, the palpable tension that permeated the dining room. And then, he had witnessed Marcel's interaction with Keanu Reeves, confirming his worst fears about what his protégé had become. Giorgio made his way to Keanu's table, stopping briefly to place a firm hand on Marcel's shoulder. "Perhaps, Marcel, you could prepare for Mr. Reeves your grandmother's spaghetti, the one I taught you when you were just a boy in my kitchen." His voice was kind but firm, leaving no room for argument. "It isn't on the menu, of course, but I believe it might be exactly what is needed tonight." Marcel, still stunned, managed to nod. "Yes, Signor Valentini, right away." As Marcel retreated to the kitchen, Giorgio turned to Keanu with a warm smile. "May I join you, Mr. Reeves? I believe we have some things in common about how food should bring people together, not set them apart." Keanu stood and pulled out a chair for the elderly restaurateur. "I'd be honored." In the kitchen, Marcel's arrival caused an immediate shift in the atmosphere. The sous chefs and line cooks, who had been working with practiced efficiency, tensed visibly. Marcel was known for his explosive temper, especially when things didn't go exactly as planned. And tonight, things were definitely not going as planned. Marcel stood in the center of the kitchen, his mind racing. Giorgio Valentini was here, in his restaurant, witnessing what had just happened. Giorgio, who had believed in him when no one else had. Giorgio, who had taught him that food was about generosity of spirit as much as it was about technique. And now Giorgio wanted him to make his grandmother's spaghetti, a dish so simple it wasn't even on the menu, a dish he hadn't prepared in years. "Chef?" his sous chef ventured cautiously. "What do you need?" Marcel looked around at his team, seeing for the first time in a long while the fear in their eyes. When had that happened? When had he become someone to be feared rather than respected? "I need," he began, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "I need to make spaghetti. My grandmother's recipe." The sous chef blinked in surprise but quickly recovered. "Of course, chef. What ingredients do you need?" Marcel closed his eyes, trying to remember. It had been so long. Fresh tomatoes, the best ones, garlic, basil, olive oil, the Sicilian one we use for special occasions, and the bronze dye pasta, the one we use for staff meal. As his team scrambled to gather the ingredients, Marcel found himself transported back to his grandmother's kitchen in Provence. He could almost smell the herbs hanging from the ceiling, feel the warm breeze through the open window, hear his grandmother's gentle instructions. Cooking is love made visible, Marcel. Never forget that. When had he forgotten? When had the joy of feeding people been replaced by the pursuit of perfection and prestige? With hands that trembled slightly, Marcel began to prepare the dish. He crushed garlic with the side of his knife, the aroma filling the air. He chopped tomatoes, their juice staining his pristine white jacket. He tore basil leaves, releasing their fragrance. Simple actions, fundamental techniques, the building blocks upon which all his culinary achievements had been built. As he worked, something began to shift within him. The tension in his shoulders eased. The perpetual furrow in his brow softened. For the first time in years, he was cooking not to impress or intimidate, but to nourish, to connect, to express something genuine. Meanwhile, in the dining room, Giorgio and Keanu were deep in conversation. Despite their different worlds, one a culinary legend, the other a Hollywood icon, they found common ground in their shared values: humility, kindness, and a genuine appreciation for life's simple pleasures. "You know," Giorgio was saying, "I have followed your career with interest, Mr. Reeves. Not just your films, but the stories about you, how you treat people, your generosity, your refusal to let fame change who you are. It's rare in any industry, but especially in ones like ours where ego so often takes center stage." Keanu looked slightly uncomfortable with the praise. "I just try to remember what matters, and it's not red carpets or magazine covers." Giorgio nodded appreciatively. "In my business, it's easy to forget that at the end of the day, we're just feeding people. All the stars and accolades, they're nice, of course, but they're not why we cook, at least they shouldn't be." "Why do you cook?" Keanu asked, genuinely curious. Giorgio's eyes crinkled with pleasure at the question. "To create moments of joy, to bring people together, to express love in a language everyone can understand." He glanced toward the kitchen. "That's what I taught Marcel, or tried to. He was my most talented student, you know. Such natural instinct, such passion. But somewhere along the way, he lost sight of why he started." Keanu finished for him. "Precisely. Success can be the most dangerous thing that happens to an artist, whether that art is on screen or on a plate." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion at a nearby table. The famous actress, celebrating her birthday, was in tears, engaged in a heated argument with one of her companions. Their voices had risen enough to catch the attention of the entire section. "I just wanted one night where it was about me, not your networking," she was saying, mascara streaming down her cheeks. "Is that too much to ask?" Her companion, a sleek man in an expensive suit, replied dismissively, "Come on, babe, don't be dramatic. This is how the business works, you know that." Emma and Jacques hovered nearby, unsure how to intervene without making the situation worse. This kind of scene was exactly what Marcel worked so hard to prevent at Maison Azur. Any disruption to the carefully cultivated atmosphere of exclusivity and refinement. To everyone's surprise, it was Keanu who stood and approached the table. "Excuse me," he said gently. "I couldn't help overhearing, and I just wanted to say..." He turned to the actress. "Happy birthday. Birthdays should be special." The actress looked up, momentarily startled out of her distress. "Thank you," she managed, recognizing him. "I'm sorry for the scene." "No need to apologize," Keanu assured her. "Feelings are never something to apologize for." He glanced at her companion, who had the grace to look slightly ashamed. Sometimes we all need a reminder about what really matters. The simple interaction diffused the tension. The actress's companion mumbled an apology, and the conversation at their table turned to more genuine topics. Memories of past birthdays, plans for the coming year, real connection replacing superficial networking. Giorgio watched the interaction with approval. "You see? That's exactly what I mean. The ability to see people, really see them, is rare, Mr. Reeves." Before Keanu could respond, Marcel emerged from the kitchen. He carried a single plate of spaghetti, not the deconstructed, foam-infused, truffle-laden concoction one might expect from a chef of his caliber, but a simple dish that resembled what a loving Italian grandmother might serve. With hands that trembled slightly, he placed the plate before Keanu. "My grandmother's recipe," he said quietly, with a few personal touches. "But at its heart, it's the first dish I ever learned to make. Before the awards, before all of this." He gestured to the opulent restaurant around them. Marcel looked different. The arrogance that had seemed etched into his features had softened. His posture was less rigid, his expression more open. He looked, Emma thought as she watched from across the room, like a human being rather than a culinary dictator. "I've included a few herbs from our rooftop garden," Marcel explained, uncharacteristically forthcoming about his process. "And the tomatoes are from a small farm just outside the city. The owner, Elise, has been growing them for 40 years. She knows each plant like it's her child." Keanu twirled a forkful and took a bite. His eyes closed briefly, and when they opened, they held genuine appreciation. "This is exceptional," he said simply. "Thank you." Marcel nodded, a different kind of pride visible on his face. Not the arrogance of before, but something more authentic. "Thank you for reminding me why I became a chef in the first place." Giorgio beamed at his former protégé. "You haven't lost it after all, Marcel. The ability to speak from your heart through your food. It's still there." Marcel turned to his mentor, and for a brief moment, his professional facade cracked completely. "I forgot, Giorgio. Somehow, I forgot what you taught me." "But now you remember," Giorgio said simply. "That's what matters." An unexpected voice joined the conversation. "Excuse me, Chef Laurent?" It was the solitary diner from the table next to the famous actress, a middle-aged woman in a modest dress who had been quietly observing everything. I couldn't help overhearing. Would it be possible for me to try that pasta as well? It looks wonderful." In the past, Marcel would have dismissed such a request outright. His tasting menu was carefully calibrated, each dish building upon the last in a culinary journey he had mapped out with scientific precision. Substitutions were not allowed. Exceptions were not made. But today, looking at the woman's hopeful expression, Marcel felt something shift within him. "Of course, madame. It would be my pleasure." The famous actress spoke up next. "Could I try it too? It is my birthday after all." She smiled, the earlier tears forgotten. "And us as well," called one of the tech billionaires. "That pasta looks more interesting than anything we've had all night." Before long, a chorus of requests filled the dining room. Marcel, rather than being offended, felt a strange lightness fill his chest. It was so simple, this dish. So basic compared to the technical marvels that had earned him his Michelin stars. And yet, it was this simple plate of pasta that was bringing his diners together, breaking down the invisible barriers between tables, creating a sense of shared experience. "Jacques," Marcel called to his senior server, "please inform the kitchen that we'll be preparing my grandmother's spaghetti for anyone who would like to try it. And bring a bottle of the 97 Barolo to Mr. Reeves's table, on the house." As Jacques hurried to comply, Marcel turned back to Keanu and Giorgio. "If you'll excuse me, I have some cooking to do. Real cooking." By the end of the evening, something extraordinary had happened at Maison Azur. The invisible barriers between tables had dissolved. The famous actress had invited the solitary diner next to her to share her birthday dessert. The tech billionaires were deep in conversation with a young couple who had saved for months for their special night out. And Marcel moved from table to table, not inspecting or judging, but connecting, asking about preferences, sharing stories about his dishes, listening more than he spoke. In the kitchen, a transformation had occurred as well. The tense silence had been replaced by genuine collaboration. Marcel worked alongside his team rather than above them, soliciting ideas, acknowledging strengths, creating an atmosphere of creativity rather than fear. Emma, watching from the hostess stand, could hardly believe the change. When Marcel approached her near the end of service, she braced herself for criticism about seating Keanu without adhering to the dress code. Instead, Marcel surprised her. "Emma, thank you," he said quietly. "For what, chef?" she asked, confused. "For seeing the person, not the clothes. For having the courage to do what was right, not just what was expected. It's a lesson I needed to relearn." He paused, then added, "And please, call me Marcel." When Keanu finally rose to leave, he was stopped by Marcel at the door. The chef handed him a small package. "For later," he explained, "a portion of the pasta for tomorrow. Because sometimes, the simplest meals are the ones that nourish us most." Keanu accepted the gift with a nod of understanding. "I have a feeling your restaurant is going to be even more special now." "Yes," Marcel agreed, glancing back at the dining room where Giorgio was still seated, watching the transformation with approval. "Because tonight, I remembered something important. A great chef feeds not just the body, but also the soul." As Keanu disappeared into the night, Marcel returned to his kitchen, already planning the changes he would make. There would still be the spectacular tasting menu, the innovative techniques, the artistic presentations. But now there would also be a small section called From the Heart, simpler dishes prepared with no less care, accessible to those who might never afford the full Maison Azur experience. And on days when the restaurant would normally be closed, the tables would be filled with those who could never dream of dining there otherwise. The homeless, the struggling, the forgotten. They would be served with the same respect as the wealthiest patrons, because Marcel had finally understood what Keanu Reeves had tried to teach him, that true hospitality doesn't discriminate, and that kindness is the most essential ingredient in any truly memorable meal. 3 months later, a food critic from a prestigious magazine visited Maison Azur. Her review, which would go viral and be reprinted in culinary publications around the world, contained this passage. "There is something remarkable happening at Marcel Laurent's Maison Azur. The technical brilliance that earned the restaurant its 3 Michelin stars remains impeccable. But there is something new here as well. A warmth, a humanity, a sense that you are not just being served food, but being welcomed into a community." The most telling moment of my visit came when I observed Chef Laurent greeting an elderly homeless man by name and escorting him to a prime table in the center of the restaurant. Raymond is a regular now on our community nights, Laurent explained to me later. He was a chef himself years ago, before life took some difficult turns. His palate is extraordinary, and his feedback has improved several dishes on our menu. When I asked Laurent about the catalyst for these changes, he smiled enigmatically. Let's just say I received an important reminder about why I became a chef in the first place, from a most unexpected source. Rumors persist that the unexpected source was none other than Keanu Reeves, who reportedly visited Maison Azur incognito and ended up teaching the famously temperamental chef a lesson in humility. Laurent neither confirms nor denies these rumors, saying only, "Whoever it was, they helped me remember that at its heart, cooking is an act of love, and love, by its very nature, must be inclusive rather than exclusive." The article was accompanied by a photograph of Marcel in his kitchen, surrounded by his team. Gone was the perpetual frown, replaced by a genuine smile. And pinned to the bulletin board behind him, barely visible but unmistakable to those who knew to look for it, was a simple handwritten note. Passion and kindness aren't mutually exclusive. In fact, they're at their most powerful when they exist together. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales of humility and transformation. And tell us in the comments, what's the most meaningful meal you've ever shared with someone special?